Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the CB&Q and the CNNW in Wyoming. Today is May 3rd, 2023. This is layout update number 42. I'm Mark Pruitt, pipe fitter. April was a busy month. The Poposia mine spur was laid. I finally made some progress around Rocky Mountain drilling on the scenery. And me and my wife spent a few days at the North Platte, Nebraska train show. I made some pretty good progress on the Powder River stock pens, and I started building the bridge for the Poposia River. We left off last month with this shot of the new Code 55 turnout for the mine spur, along with my pre-production sample of 3D printed ties. Right after posting that video, I printed what I hoped would be the first set of production ties. Here they are under the turnout. On the 5th, I installed the west end of the Hudson siding and the new turnout for the mine. I spent several days preparing for the North Platte train show and got back to the mine spur the next week. On the 13th, I laid the track to the mine and wired it into the bus. I posted a YouTube short showing delivery of the first hoppers to the mine. Rewinding a few days, on April 7th I spent some time laying out the chain link fencing I would need around Rocky Mountain drilling. I was going to visit Dave on the 10th, and he very generously offered to fabricate a section of the fence for me. He would also be showing me how he makes those fences. This is the final diagram for the fences in the area. Dimensions are approximate but close. As always, my visit to Dave's was a lot of fun. I came home that evening with a couple fence sections I'd built under his tutelage, plus a long section he'd built before I got there. Funny thing, we didn't find any time to run trains on his layout. The rest of the week after returning from Dave's was spent in preparations for the trip to North Platte. More on that in a minute. After we got back from that trip, I repainted the section of chain link fence Dave made for me, then installed it on the layout. In this view looking towards the east corner of Casper, you can see the fence behind and to the right of Todd Brothers. About North Platte, I took quite a bit of stuff with me to sell. Most of it didn't sell, of course, but I did finally manage to get rid of the 130-foot turntable and roundhouse. The guy who bought it was very pleased, and so was I. I also sold several of the mid-80s Proto diesels I'd bought when I lived in the Seattle area, and some of the items I inherited from Chuck Reisha when he passed away last year. I even sold a couple of my 3D printed houses. Perhaps most surprising of all is that my wife went with me. So what will I do with all the proceeds from the show? Well, it's already spent. I bought a new 90-foot turntable for Grable and a TCS Wow Sound kit for the CNW 10-wheeler I acquired a few months ago. Once back from North Platte, I focused on the Powder River stock pens. First order of business was to stain wood for the loading chutes. While the stain was drying, I began gluing the finish pins to the foam core board and installing the pen gates. I was doing this work on the library table because my workbench isn't big or flat enough for this project. I also set up a section of track for a couple of stock cars to make sure I got the spacing of the loading chutes at least close. Then I started in on the chutes themselves. Since both sheep and cattle are loaded in Powder River, each set of chutes must have ramps to load single and double-deck stock cars. This is the first upper-level ramp, upside down in my gluing jig, until the super glue holding my 3D printed chute floor dries. A couple days later, the first set of chutes is complete, and the adjacent pen has been glued to the foam core and braced until it dries. On the 23rd, I finished and installed the second set of loading chutes. At this point, I was out of fence railings. Those chutes used up a lot of that. I was out of railing material as well, so I ordered some more and set the pens aside for now. During the downtimes, while I was waiting for glue to dry on the pens, I did a few other things. First, I painted the window castings for the larger 3D printed house and installed them. I also designed and printed out strips of replacement ties for under rail joiners for the different types of track I use. I designed them to be a few thousandths of an inch less tall than the flex track ties to fit under the rail joiners. I thought they might be easier to use than the original ties. Boy, was I right! It took a small fraction of the time to install the 3D printed ties that it would have taken to install the original ties. I started with the new tracks west of Hudson. Even when I have to sand the resin ties down a bit to fit, it's still easier than working with the original ties, because the resin ties are so much easier to sand. Of course, appearance is the most important thing. If these 3D printed ties stand out after the track is painted, they'll be totally unsuitable for use in the future. I'm going to paint some of the track early this month, so I'll report on how well the resin ties work in the next update. During the last week of April, I spent a couple hours adding roofing, painted 320 grit sandpaper cut into 3-foot wide strips, to the larger Casper house. The strips were affixed using Super 77 spray glue, then a felt tip marker added roofing tar to the paper edges. I used a cut-off toothpick for a plumbing vent. Still to come is a chimney and weathering of the house, especially the roof, to kill the shine. The big project I started in late April was building the Proposal Bridge. Here the deck is glued and clamped together, with weights on each section to ensure the deck is flat. Like the stock pens, this project is being done on the library table. The next day, the deck was thoroughly dry. The design is rather ingenious, with steel strips that are inserted the length of the bridge down the center line to provide the structural strength and rigidity for the finished kit. I added the diagonals to the bottom of the deck and set it aside to dry for the night. The next day I painted the bridge black and the bridge ties brown. I left them all to dry overnight. I've worked on the trusses the last couple of days. This is a moderately complex kit with construction made much more difficult thanks to hard-to-follow, unclear instructions. Apparently there have been changes to the kit that are not reflected in the instruction book. I've circled some of the discrepancies on both the instruction sheets and a photo of the deck. There is a series of videos on YouTube detailing construction of the bridge, but while those clarify many points inadequately covered in the printed instructions, there are still some omissions. I emailed Central Valley over a week ago with questions and have not yet heard back. And there we have it. I hope to complete the stock pens this month, and the bridge too. I think it's also time I get started on the swing-out bridge that will connect Basin to Grable. Dave, who was here on April 24th, will try to make it down again to help me with that. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next month.